Hello class, welcome to week 6. Well, I kind of already said welcome to you guys in the previous video. So this video is going to be for like homework assistance. So I currently have lab activity 3.7 up already. I believe that is the first of the 3 assignments. Yep. So I did write some stuff in here. So for this assignment, the aim, they say, is using a for loop. So we already know what a for loop is. And the range function in conjunction with the for loop. You have been asked to find the even numbers between 5 and 55 and then find their sum. So steps for completion: define a counter for the sum named total sum. So a counter, they're just kind of referring to a variable, and they want us to call it total sum. Total sum, and we can give it the value of 0 right now. So next step is define a for loop with an even range for numbers between 5 and 55. So 5 and 55 is what's going to go into our range function. Range method, range function. I believe it's function. So let's do our for loop. So it always starts off with for followed by our dummy variable. In this case, it can be like whatever you want to name it. I'm just gonna do like let's do num for numbers because we're trying to find the even range for numbers between 5 and 55. And then in is kind of like it's just the syntax of the for loop. So for dummy variable in, and then the kind of scope that we're going to examine. And in this particular case, instead of using a list, we're going to use a range. So we're going to type in range, and we already know our range. It's going to be between 5 and 55. And then we do the colon. That's just basic syntax for the for loop. So the next line, so this is the action that the for loop is going to execute. Step 3, add each loop to number to the sum. Outside the loop, print total sum. So I'm just going to write a placeholder here because I already know what the end of my loop is going to look like. Well, this is not technically part of the loop. This is outside of the for loop, but this is step 4. So outside of the loop, print total sum. So I'm just going to write that because I already know that's what they want. Very simple. So now getting back to the body of the for loop, they want us to define a for loop with an even range for numbers between 5 and 55. So they want us to get the even range, like the even numbers between 5 and 55. So to do that, what we could do is we could use a if statement. So an if statement within the for loop. So to do that, you just write if, make sure it's indented properly, and then we can use, so think of the range like this right here. Just think of it as a list, and it's a list of numbers between 5 and 55. So this num, this dummy variable, think of it as like uh, it represents each of those even numbers. So like 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on. So the if statement that I'm going to write here, I'm going to use that dummy variable and as like one of the, I guess, arguments that I'm going to pass. So if, like, say 6, and I'm going to do module 2, and then why do I do module 2? Because I want to make sure the number can be divided by 2, and I'm not going to write and, but I mean like and it is equal to 0. And the reason I don't do 1 equal sign and do 2 equal signs is I'm comparing this left side, this num module 2, with the right side. You only do the single equal sign like if I'm assigning a value to a variable, if you're using it for comparisons purposes, like we're doing here in the if statement, you do two equal signs. So that's that. Don't forget to do the colon at the end. So now notice that my cursor's indented again, like it already does it for me. That's because now I'm in the if statement. I'm technically still within the for loop, but this line of code that I'm going to write pertains specifically to the if. So if 6 it is divided, or module 2, so 6 divided by 2 it equals 0, because 2 goes into 6 evenly. So if that's true, they want us to define a counter for loop with an even range. Add each looped number to the sum. So to do that, I'm just going to make sure okay. To do that, I would do total sum, right, plus equals num. Because they want us to add the total number, like say that number, so like 6, to sum, and sum is currently 0. So what this is actually doing, it's doing total sum equals, what this actually means, this plus equal. So this plus equal really says total sum equals total sum plus num. So in this case, we know that total sum is currently 0, and num can be, it's the even numbers between 5 and 55. So the first even number will be 6. So the first number that's going to be added to total sum is 6. The next even number will be 8. The next after that will be 10, and so forth. And then at the very end of this entire for loop, it's going to print out the combined, like the combined value of total sum, as we'll see when we run this code. So I'm just gonna check this. Okay, I get 2 out of 2 checks, great. And then if I do main.py, or Python main.py, it's gonna give me 750, because that's 6 plus 8 plus 10 plus 12 plus 14. It's all of that combined is 750, all the way up until 54. And that's essentially it for the first program. I hope that made a little bit of sense to you guys. Just think of it, this num, it represents all of the even numbers, or all of the numbers between 5 and 55, but when this if statement runs, it's only going to add the even numbers to total sum. It's not going to add the odd numbers. So like say for when we do get 5, when it tries to search 5 out of 55, this if statement won't run. It's just going to continue going back into the for statement. It's going to check 6. It will add 6 to total sum. When it goes to 7, the if statement 7 module 2 does not equal 0, so it does not add 7 to total sum. So it still checks. This for loop will check every single number from 5 all the way to 54. Because remember, range doesn't check 55, it checks the number prior to it. So it's going to check from 5 all the way to 54, and only add the even numbers to total sum. That's all it's doing. And then at the end, it prints out that total sum, that new value to total sum, which is 750. And that's the first program. So let's go to the second program. I believe it's 3.8, nested loop. So we'll do start, wait for that to load. And so for nested loop, it's also a for loop. The only difference is we're going to have a for loop inside a for loop. That's what a nested loop is. And if you guys need like more detail on nested loops, I did include that in the other video that I posted on Blackboard under week 6. Also, I did include a section on ranges in that video, so for the previous program that we just did, if you guys want like a better understanding of that, you guys can go to that other video. It's under week 6 folder on Blackboard. So let's go through this activity. So the aim is to write a simple nested loop example that sums the even and odd numbers between 5 and 15. So just from that, I already know we're going to use the range function again for our for loops, for both for loops, because it's a nested for loop. So we can go through the steps for completion. So number one, write a for loop with a range function for even numbers. Okay, so let's start our for loop. We can do for. Remember, the word that comes after for is going to be our dummy variable. It's not a declared variable. It's just something, like, think of it as a placeholder that represents every element in our list, or in this case our range. So right now we could do for. I'll call my dummy variable even. In is just always going to be there, so it doesn't mean anything. It's just the way for loops are structured. And then in this case, instead of using a list, we're going to use a range. And our range is going to contain every number between 5 and 15, but that are even. So to do that, we could, if we did start with 5, the for loop will check 5. So instead of doing 5, knowing that 5 is not an even number, we can start our for loop at 6. And then we could end it at 15 as well, because when you do use the range function, when you do enter in a number, like say in this case 15, it's not going to check the 15th number, it's going to stop at 14. So that's kind of why it's okay to do 15. And then at the very end of the range, I'm going to add 2. This just means when this range does print out, it's going to skip by 2. So like it's going to start at 6, then it's going to go to 8, and then 10, 12, 14, and end it right there. So if you guys, like I said, if you guys do need more information on the range structure of like the syntax, I did include that in the other video. There's like 3 ways to do ranges. This is the final way to do it. So don't forget the colon at the very end. Press enter, it's going to indent for you. Now, we've already created our outside for loop. Now we're going to create that nested for loop. So for the nested for loop, we're going to do the odd numbers. So for odd, remember this odd represents the dummy variable here. In doesn't change. Range is kind of like that list, or in this case like in this case it's like a list of numbers that it's going to go through. We want the odd numbers. So to do that, we can do 5. We could start at 5 because 5 is the odd number. They want 5 through 15. We can do 15. And then we could do 2. So it's going to start at 5. It's going to go to 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15. So don't forget the colon. And now they want us to, so we did the 2 for loops, so that's 1 and 2. So for 3, use a variable called calc. Okay, so they want us to declare a variable. They don't really say where, so I'm just assuming based on the structure of nested for loops, I'm not going to, I could put it before the original for loop, but I think they want it inside the nested for loop, the for odd. So I'm going to put it there for now. They want us to use a variable called calc to calculate the sum of even and odd numbers. So we know that this dummy variable represents all of the even numbers from this range, and this odd dummy variable represents all of the odd numbers from this range. So if I was doing a calculation of even and odd numbers, like the sum of even and odd numbers, I'm just going to use the dummy variables to do it. Oh, I deleted my code. Bring that back up. Okay, so create this, and then even plus odd, because that's all they're asking for. And then after that, the very last line was print the computation of each even number plus the odd number equal to calc to the terminal. So it's a print statement. They want print the computation of each even number. Okay. Could do plus. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to write it first and then I'll kind of explain. odd. Calc. So there's a couple things going on here. So I am printing out the I guess the even number. So like this, the sum of each even number. It's represented by the dummy variable of even. I created a string that has the plus operator. Now this plus operator, think of it as like a word. Don't think of it as the actual plus operator. They're not the same things. Because they're in quotation marks, it's a string. It's more for the user to see. It's like a visual thing. Then I have my odd dummy variable here again. Then I have another string that has an equal sign within it. Just it's more of a visual thing for the user. And then I have calc. Calc has the even number and the sum of the even number and odd number. So this is just going to look really nice for the user. Remember, if we have like a variable and then a string and then a variable string and then a variable, we have to separate them with commas within the print statement. So that's why I did commas after each one. I didn't do a comma after odd, so it's going to return an error. So good thing I caught that. So now if I go down here and press on that, it should be good. So 1 out of 1 checks passed, and then the second one should also check. Yep. And then if I run the code, you're going to see why I kind of did that print statement as I did it. Okay, so it printed out every single addition of like the first even number, which is 6, plus the first odd number, which was 5, and then it's 11, then the 6 plus 7, and 6 plus 8, and so forth. Yeah, it's a lot, but it is what they wanted. And we could actually kind of see it right here. So the output will be as shown as in snippet 3.58. So we got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Okay, so if you guys aren't sure, you guys can double check. But from a visual, just quick look, it looks correct. We have 5 of each. So that's kind of what they wanted there. So that's nested loops, very simple. But like if you guys need practice or like just an explanation of nested loops, I do have that in that other YouTube video that's under the week 6 folder. So that's activity 3.8. So I would recommend going to that if you guys need a kind of review of that. And then, so that's 3.7, 3.8. I believe we also have 3.9. Let me see if I could find 3.9. Breaking. Okay, 3.9. So 3.9, breaking out of loops. So to break out of loops, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. We can use break, we can use continue, we could use pass. A lot of different ways we can do it. Well, pass is a little bit different, but break and continues a way to like skip certain parts of a list. Break is a way of just once you find a certain part, like a certain element in your list, and you want to tell the code to stop. That's what we use break for. So in this scenario, you have been asked to write a loop that outputs values in a database column ranging between 10 and 100. Any number that is not divisible by 5 and any number that is not an integer should be ignored. So just from that, we already know that we're going to use continue for that, for any number that is not divisible by 5 and any number that is not an integer. So when the value in the loop hits 95, break the loop prematurely. So that's where we could already tell that's where we're going to put our break. So far we have like I believe it was 2 continues, any number not divisible by 5, 2 continues and 1 break so far. One of your team members has advised the use of break, continue, and pass. Okay. So define a for loop using the range function to create the lower 10 and upper 100 limits. So kind of the same syntax we did before. We could do for, and then we could do like anything here. I can just do n. We'll put it in because in doesn't change, and then we do inside the range. They already gave us the range of 10 and 100. We could do a colon there. So now we're not going to do nested for loops. We're going to do a for loop with if, like an if statement inside, because there's multiple outcomes that could happen. Using the if is probably our best bet here. So I don't know if they kind of like tell you to use an if statement. No, okay, they don't. But because there's multiple outcomes that we want to check, this is the best way of doing so. So define. Okay, define a condition that checks for 0. So we want to check our dummy variable and see if it equals 0. So that's why I would do n, the double equal sign, 0. So define a condition that checks for 0, and we have to write something. So we'll just kind of we'll do continue here, because if it equals 0, we're just gonna tell the code to like just keep going. So now the elif, I think the elif will deal with the second condition, so number 3. So define a condition that checks whether the number is divisible by 5. So now we could do our dummy variable. We can, to know if it's divisible by 5, we can use the module. So module, and then we could do 5, and define a condition that checks the data type. Okay, so we're still on 3. And let's say that it's not equal to 0, right? And then inside of that, we'll do continue. So, okay. And then we're going to do another elif statement. We're still going to use our same dummy variable, but now we're going to check, actually, we're not going to put the dummy variable there. We're going to use the type function to check the type of our dummy variable. And we kind of already know that it's going to be like a number, but right now we'll just kind of put our dummy variable inside type. We're going to say if it's not equal to int, because remember, they want us to make sure any value that is not an integer should be ignored. So if the number is not an int, continue. So the code is going to see like, okay, well, does our dummy variable, is our dummy variable an integer? If it's not, then continue with the rest of the code. So elif, because this is our third elif, so this one's gonna check to see if when the value in the loop hits 95, break the loop. So if n equals 95, break. Very simple. And then the last thing will be our else statement. The else statement is just going to be, this is where we could use pass. And then the final thing will be the print statement. Print the number if it meets the condition. Okay. So this kind of still exists in the for loop. So we're just going to print out n here. And then we could kind of check the task to make sure everything's okay. Okay. So now when I run the code, I should get something similar to this. And these dots are just there to show that there's more numbers here. They just didn't want to list everything. And that's, this one was a little bit more complicated, but we did reach all of the requirements. So we defined a condition that checks for 0. We put it here. If it's 0, then we continue with the rest of our code. Great. So all it means is continue with the next elif statement. It's not really executing anything, it's just saying continue with the if statement. The first elif statement checks to make sure that the number is not divisible by 5. So that means when we take a number and we divide it by 5, it should not equal 0. So the remainder should not equal 0. So that's why we use the module, because if it cleanly divides by 5, it's going to give us 0. So that's why we add the not operator and equal to 0. And then we do continue, and then it continues with the next part of the code to check, see that the value is not an integer, or if any value that is not an integer should be ignored. And then finally, once this for loop goes through all these numbers from 10 all the way to 95, once it reaches 95, it's going to stop the for loop, or stop the if statement, and break. And then it's going to print out n at the very end, and that's it. And that was lab activity 3.9, breaking out of loops. That one was a little bit harder than the others, so I do understand if you do struggle with that one a little bit. It's really just there to show you how to use continue and how to use break. And the book also uses pass, but pass is kind of like, it's not used a whole lot. Um, so if you guys need more information specifically on break and continue, I also included a section on that in the other YouTube video where I kind of go more in depth on how to use those. Here, this program was just like kind of like a random program that uses those just to introduce you to the topic, but I do give an explanation on that in the other video. So I do recommend going to that video. It's a little bit long, but it's definitely worth your time. Um, and that's really it for the homeworks. That is 3.7, 3.8, and 3.9. I did take out Abby's ice cream shop because I kind of felt like it was a bit much. Just like the moment you open the program, you see like this whole thing, or this predefined code on the right side. I felt like this is more of a, yeah, it's a lot. This is like all comments and like all stuff that they want you to include in your code, and it just becomes this really complicated scenario. So I kind of felt like uh, it's a bit much for a homework assignment, maybe more of a possible test question moving forward, but we'll see. Um, and that's pretty much it. So I will see you guys in week 7.